Hey everyone, it's Alicia. Welcome to another men's edition of Tirzah at the Table. Today I have my cousin Tanner James from here in Kentucky, and he has lots of things he could share about himself from working towards being a pastor, being a musician, being a husband, being a father. But I'm going to let him introduce himself a little more and tell you about how he found Jesus. Welcome, Tanner.
Hello, good to see you today. So, one thing that how I found Jesus was really interesting because you don't really write notes back and forth in church. But I was in a fall revival at my home church here in Danville, Kentucky. And this lady who's been one of my big supporters, and she's always still is, it was Barbara Satterley. We was writing notes back and forth during this fall revival. And she says, "Do you know who God is?" And I was like, "Well, I went to church since I was five, so possibly." But it came to the point that she was writing me back and forth, and I truly didn't know who God was. And I thought, oh, well, I've been in church since I was five, so here we go. I have everything. But after writing notes back and forth, like middle school, like you do in middle school, she made me realize that my relationship with him was just, I had just went to church and didn't really have a strong relationship. And in that 30 minutes of writing notes back and forth, she was able to witness to me, give me to tell me how God's word can work in my life, how it worked in her life, how it worked in all of her family's life, to a point that it made me feel like, oh my, I've been missing out. And I took that faithful leap and went forward and gave my life to Christ that night. And I was baptized about maybe in March, a few months after that. And after I actually realized, I actually got baptized by my cousin, who is a distant cousin, actually. And we thought that was amazing to be baptized by your cousin. So finding Jesus was kind of weird. It felt like I was in middle school getting write notes back and forth and stuff like that.
That's really cool. And I'm going to touch back on something you said at the beginning because one of the things I struggled with in moving to Kentucky was the definition of revival. Because for me, it has a very different meaning than it does here. Can you explain what you meant when you said you were at revival?
So revival here in Kentucky, it's kind of like it's not like the Asbury revival, it's like multiple days. But a revival here, and I guess in the Baptist church, if you think about it, is just a time to come together to help get like a shock of reality and to say, hey, look, there's stuff going on around our church. Let's get revival in this city. Let's get revival started. And I'm not saying that it's not like the one at Asbury, but I'm going to say this. Some churches can have revivals like this and they can break out. I do know a church in Eastern Kentucky, they had one and they went on for almost 3 weeks doing it. So revival here is just to give a kickstart into your city, because sometimes you don't even know what's going on around you in your church.
That's really helpful. Thank you for sharing that because I struggled with that concept because I think that's different in Kentucky and it may be a Baptist thing, like you said, outside of Asbury, which is also in Kentucky, but Asbury is its own thing. So
Yeah.
I just want to help people understand a little more of the culture. And that's something I wanted to talk to you about as well, because I get this question. People hear my accent that is very slight, and they are like, oh, what's it like in the South? And what are people like in the South? What's the culture like? So you shared a little bit about Jesus, but what is it like growing up in more rural Kentucky and with the culture here?
Well, mind you, I grew up a lot in the city, but I had on my dad's side, they're more rural. They live in more in the Stanford, Kentucky area. And so I got to see the country aspect a little bit more. And growing up in a rural community is a little difficult because there's not a lot of things. There's not a lot of certain things you can find. Like there you have sometimes you have to drive a certain amount to go to a store. Sometimes you have to drive a certain amount to go to a doctor. But me being, I guess as my wife says, I'm a city kid. I don't think I am, because to the point I feel like I still have that country twang. Everybody does, even if you're city. And I think growing up, it made me think, I got to see the aspect of what it is like in the city, but also getting to see the aspect of what it is like in the rural community. Like when I went to school with a bunch of these kids that didn't want to get dirty. We went to go do something. I was like, what are you worrying about getting dirty? Let's go on and get dirty. To me, I was like, I have to get my hands dirty to get stuff done. And that's the thing you learn about in the rural community. You learn that sometimes you have to get your hands dirty when you don't want to.
I like that. And I feel like I should clarify for people that when you say city, are you talking more a smaller city?
Yeah, a smaller city. We're not talking like a Lexington, Kentucky, or like I guess if you're thinking not like Milwaukee, not a big city like that.
Yeah. And it's been interesting for me seeing the different cultures here. And one of the things I've noticed is you and your wife, Kayla, who also happens to work for Tirzah, have the highest education levels typically of the people you're around. That's
Mhm.
something I've noticed. And you're both fairly young. What is
Mhm.
that like for you, or do you even think about it?
Well, I don't really think about it because where I went to school at, they said always some of my professors always told me that don't forget where you come from.
Mhm.
So when going to school, a lot of my friends after they graduated with their preaching degrees, they decided, hey, let me go to this big church in Florida. But me, I was more of let me go back home and let me get into a little country church and let me get acquainted with that because I feel in a church like that, you get more attached to your members than you do when you go to a church that has almost 2,000 plus. And a lot of my friends, they connect with their people, but they don't get to talk to them all the time because they don't get to see them. And that's one thing. It didn't bother me coming back home with a bachelor's degree because, like, we have Center College in the area. Center College is probably one of the top prestigious schools compared to Transy in Lexington. So it didn't scare me. It just made me think, okay, well, I have a degree. Don't act snobby. Just talk how you know. Remember where you come from.
Within that, do you feel like going into those more rural churches that people treat you differently?
Sometimes, because I guess some people get scared of the degree because they think you're going to get to, I guess I call it the nerdy way. And in a few churches I've been in, the first church I was in, I only had my bachelor's degree. So I didn't feel like I had this big old degree like I have now with my master's degree in divinity. But in some of these smaller churches, you can feel like people may look at you different, like, oh, he has this big degree. Oh. And to me, that I had a friend say this, and he only said this because he was going through a difficult time. And he threw away his degrees when he was moving out of his house. And he goes, well, they're just pieces of paper. I said, but that's piece of paper you put your heart and soul into. And after he got better, he finally realized, wow, you were right. It is just a piece. And I told him, I said, but you were right too. It is just a piece of paper. But that piece of paper was your blood, sweat, and tears you put into it.
I did the same thing for a season, so that's a really good answer to him with that. It is something you work very hard for, but it's also about not tying your identity into it. I'm just trying to help people understand more of the culture. So I do want to say, what have been your favorite things in small churches besides getting to know everybody?
I'm going to tell you one of the big things you love in small churches is getting to see. In my first church that I served in after school, it was really my first church. The other one, I was only there for a few months because I wanted to finish school and not fail. So pretty much my first church was in Mitchellsburg, Kentucky, right here and close to Bull County. And one of the things that I even loved when I started going to Double Springs with my wife, was getting to see how much a church has grown from a start from it to win. At Mitchellsburg, I only had two deacons. One was 90 and the other one was 40. And that's the big thing I like to see. You see this big gap in the age of your deacons. And one of the things that I loved and I could say this just because I didn't serve at Double Springs, but still going to Double Springs now. The one thing that touched me was two ladies at that church. They touched my heart to a point when I came in. I was new. I was still new to ministry, still trying to grow a little bit. And they kind of just gave me some encouragement when I got down on myself. I came to Double Springs to heal because I had a very difficult time at one of my churches and I had to come heal. And I came and healed, and they were two big supporters. And that was Miss Selma and Miss Joyce. They gave me a lot of encouragement. And even after they passed away and I went to their funerals, I just felt how much these two women had poured into people. Even the pastor that did their funerals, you could literally hear and feel how these older ladies touched these people when they were going through a difficult time and stuff like that.
I love that. I'm just gonna throw in a side note. I do actually really enjoy the potlucks. It feels very old fashioned and not something you see in a city at all. That's been one of my favorite things in smaller churches. But I want to segue. We've talked a lot about you wanting to be a pastor, having done some work as a pastor. And so, one of the things that I would love to segue into is you've also talked about how you're married and how you're young. And I would love to have you describe to people like how you and Kayla prioritize being married and pursuing dreams at the same time and also having a kiddo.
Well, one big thing is we both said when we got together, we wanted to put Jesus first. And we always wanted to put Jesus first. We pray before every meal. We've been teaching our son about how Jesus can be in his life. He watches a lot of Listener Kids, which is Christ based videos and songs and good news guys. And we balance our dreams by realizing one, right now I'm already done with my degrees, but my wife's doing her degree in social work and, making time for one another. But because for the longest time we did have some issues not making date nights. That's one big thing you need to have a date night. Now, have we had a date night lately? Probably not. But, it's good to have that time because what I learned in school was don't let ministry take control of your life to a point where you can't spend time with your family. Because if not, your ministry's not going to grow. Your depression level's going to go up and you're just going to get down on yourself. And one of the things that my teachers always taught me in school was they taught us this story of this guy who was a pastor in Louisville, this big church. And he got so focusing on church to a point that he forgot about his family at home. And our professor told us, said, you do not want to get to that point because if it gets to that point, it can lead to things that you don't want to happen. It could lead to kids not wanting to be around you because they not get to see you. It could lead to your wife leaving you because she don't ever have time with you. And when I heard that and I told myself I would never get that put into church. And of course, all the churches I was in, I was part-time, but I still felt like I was full-time. So the last church we were at, I was so into my ministry that sometimes I did forget, hey, I have a family to take care of too. So it was trying to prioritize thinking, oh, if I'm going to grow and I want to have a successful family in the Lord, then I have to be there with them to grow in the Lord too.
I really like that. Speaking from the perspective of a pastor's kid, actually, too. One of the challenges in the church we grew up in is not something that my parents were struggling with. Like, my parents actively put in a lot of effort to keep us with our extended family. And clearly, you know that as extended family. But one of the things with that was the church would put a lot of stipulations around family and say that family was a bad influence.
Mm.
to you being a part of a church, which is extremely unhealthy and also a sign of a cult. So, anybody listening, if a church is deliberately trying to separate you from your family, don't go there. Unless your family is like abusing you, that's a different story. But I like that you said that about prioritizing family first. One of my hearts for Tirzah and in ministry, doing work within the foster care system and different things, is that family should always be first. When you go into the Bible and when you go into Genesis, the first thing God created was family.
Mhm.
So if we're truly going back to the root of who God created us to be, that is going back to family.
Mhm.
And the agency I work for full time, that's actually its motto, is that the future is formed through families. So
Mm.
that means that we're always looking towards building the family, because all the other problems in this country could be solved if
Mm.
families were healthy, and if churches, as you're talking about pastoral work and coming from a pastoral lens, is it's their focus needs to be on bringing the family together, and the church can do a lot more for all the needs in the community when
Mhm.
there's healthy families. So I'm going to ask you too, what how do you prioritize being a dad, and what does that look like for you?
So I'm just going to say this. I do have another job outside of being a pastor. And sometimes it can be hard to prioritize to be a dad in the same aspect. But what I try to do is I try to come home after I get off work and spend time with both Kayla and Silas. But my son is a big mama's boy. So it can be hard at sometimes to, I guess, because she's with them 24/7. And it comes to a point of I have to realize that I have to take initiative. Yes. Am I still kind of nervous to take initiative and be by myself with him sometimes? Yeah, I'll be honest that with on here because I'm not with him all the time. And when he cries, who's he going to go to? He doesn't go to me most of the time. He goes to his mama because mama's there for him. So I have to realize that I have to prioritize by being there for him and being that godly father that I want to be for him. Sometimes it can be difficult. We all make mistakes. But the thing is, I try to be that godly figure that I want to be for him because a lot of kids nowadays don't get to have that. Like you talked about working in foster care. Sometimes kids, they go into foster care because their families couldn't take care of them. And it comes to a point, sometimes the families that adopt them, they're like, they never had a strong male role model until they get adopted by that family.
And I think this is exactly what I was asking that you answered well, is so it's something you're learning and growing in, like so many other areas
Yeah.
of life. And I think that is the journey of parenthood. I don't think that changes with gender either. I think that's a family decision where you come to what works best for your family. And what I heard you say is in this season of life, provider has to be your focus as a
Hmm.
father to make sure that Kayla has the time she
Hmm.
needs with Silas,
Yeah.
which is your son's name for those who don't know.
Yeah.
Correct me if I summed that up wrong, but I think that's what I heard.
No, that, yeah.
So, with all that, you're both young and you've been married for a while and you've been a father for a while. So, if you could go back to your younger self when you were first married, what would you say to him?
One, I would have told him to leave the job that he was at the time because it was tearing him apart. And two, I would say go out and find a job that you didn't feel like that you were always stressed coming home and make sure to find it where you'd be able to have enough money to provide to in today's society because of gas prices and everything right now. It's hard to be a young family and have a job and try to provide for a family when there's only one income coming in the household. It's hard, but I would tell him just keep trying. It's going to get better For the longest time, I was struggling because I left the church because I got church hurt. And it came to that point that I was so hurt that I would worry about everything. I would worry about finances. I'd worry about this. I'd worry about that and that and that. But the thing I would tell him is just put God and let God take care of it. Because so many times in that aspect, I always forgot being, and mind you, being a youth pastor at a pretty good church in Eubank, Kentucky. It made me realize it was like, don't let people run over you, but also don't forget that God can help you in any aspect of your life. And it may not be it could be the finances. You can pray and say, hey, God, I hope you give me, I need some money really bad right now. But God doesn't answer our prayers right away. So don't be impatient, be patient and just realize that it's going to get better. It may take some time. It may have some obstacles. It may have some hills and valleys that you have to go through to get to. But just remember that it's not, it'll get better.
Instead of quoting the Bible right now, I'm going to quote that I'm hearing you say, Dory from Finding Nemo. Just keep swimming.
Yes. You just have to keep trying. There's going to be some times where you're going to try new things and it's going to fail, and you're going to do things that it's going to get to a point where you're going to feel like your life is falling apart. But then 2 weeks later, your life is where you would want it to be.
I like that you said that because it really can be that fast 2 weeks. You have to keep going through everything. Any final thoughts you want to share in these last couple minutes before we close?
I don't have really any final thoughts, but this was a fun time to come on and be able to speak and maybe help others maybe going through a time like this. And maybe there's some women that are going to be on here that have husbands that are struggling like this. And hopefully, me sharing today will hopefully open up their husbands' hearts and want to help them more and more.
Well, I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate you sharing where you're at now and where you want to be, because I think that is important, that we're all in process. And then in like 20 years, you should have somewhere you want to go then too. It's like life is a journey. And the Bible says God's called us to different things in different seasons. So it'll
Mm-hmm.
be cool in a few years to look back and be like, oh, I achieved this. And now this is what I'm working towards.
Mm-hmm.
But thank you for coming on, and thank you everyone for listening today.